Welcome to Harvest Mission Community Church. You are listening to one of our sermons.
If you have your Bibles, please turn to Psalm 39. We'll be looking at 3 verses, starting from verse 4 through verse 6. Psalm 39, verse 4 through 6. Today we're going to cover the part 3 of the 5-part series called Margins. If you remember, we decided to start this series because creating margin in our lives is very important. Because when you create the margins, the time and the space, that is when you're able to understand more of what God desires, because you're going to be able to communicate with Him. You're going to hear from Him. And from there, you're going to be freed up to say, God, I'm fully available. Whatever it is that you desire for me to do, I will do. And that's why I think creating margins in your life is vital and is very important. 2 weeks ago in part 1, we talked about creating margins for God. Many of you right now are making decisions, very important decisions, without creating margins from God. So a lot of it is your own desires. Sometimes it's very self-centered. There are times when you hear from other people, but you can't always be here. Yes, please get advice, get input. But at the end of the day, you have to make a decision because you're going to be standing in front of God for every single decision that you have made. So that's why we've been trying to encourage you to not make these major decisions in your life without creating the margin to be in His presence, to hear the voice of God through His Word. Sometimes through the time of prayer, you'll have a sense of peace and joy when He does speak to you. So without the margins to say, God, you are the number one priority in my life. A lot of us are not going to have the freedom to make choices to choose Him and choose His kingdom. Last week, we talked about, in part 2, creating margins with our finances. Oftentimes, the way we spend our money is really on ourselves. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this because we're going to talk about time and how that's kind of correlated to a lot of the other things that we've been talking about. And the reason why creating margin with finances is so important is there will be a time when we're going to be challenged. God's going to challenge us to be generous in different contexts. And a lot of times when you have not created the margins and you've spent everything, you're in debt, you will not be able to respond to God. I think in more than anything else, I think the number one reason why we don't have margin in our finances is because we don't know how to budget. And so we always spend more than we really have. That's why we continue to be in debt and we cannot serve Him in many different ways, especially if God says, here's a need, this is what I want you to be a part of, and we can't do that because we don't have the margins. Today, I want to talk about creating margins with our time. And this is something that I think it will resonate with all of us because time is something that is constantly fleeting from us. We wish we had more time so that we could study more for the exam. I don't know how many of you feel that. Or I wish we had more time so that I can do X, Y, Z. So I think this is something that all of us can relate to. And as we talk about time, I want to ask us this question. I'm wondering if you could be honest here. How many of you wish you have more than 24 hours in a day? Go ahead and just raise your hand. All right. See, these are people who are being honest here. I remember I was kind of reflecting on this for my life. I would say to myself, I wish I had more hours than in a day. So I want more than 24 hours in a day. But the more I began to ask that question to myself, I came to the realization that if I had more time in my life, that would not fix my problems. I want you to think about that for a moment. By having more time in your life, more than 24 hours, that would not necessarily change the situation that you're in. If you had more time, you will end up working more and fueling your workaholic, I was going to say alcoholic, but the workaholic tendencies in our lives. And I know that that is true of me. If I have more than 24 hours, I'm going to keep on working and doing things. If we had more time, you would be more overexposed with so much more distractions. You will catch one more series on Netflix or YouTube. So just by having more time in your life does not address the issue that's in your heart. If you have more time, you will fill it up with more meetings because some of us in this room don't know how to say no. And so just because you have more time, does that mean that you could take care of more stuff? Because the real issue is your heart of always wanting to please people, and you just don't know how to say no. If you had more time, you would just be just as tired, just as restless, if not more, because you haven't really found the sense of purpose in your life. But what if we thought about time differently? Instead of wanting more time, what if we made decisions based on the time that we do have? So think about that for a moment. Instead of wanting more time, with what we have, which is 24 hours, which is universal for every single human being in this world, whether you're a Christian or not, that all of us have 24 hours in a day, what if instead of having more, we begin to look at the 24 hours and evaluate and ask ourselves, are we using our time wisely for the glory of God? What if it's more of a time management issue than anything else? What if it's more of a time investment issue than anything else? As I say often, we have 24 hours in a day, 168 hours in a week, 8,760 hours in, what is it? In a month. Is that right? In a year. 24 hours in a day, 168 hours in a week, and 8,760 hours in a year. With every single hour that you have, the question is, how are you spending it? Are you creating margins for those things that are important to you? Are you creating margin with your time that are very important to the things of God? Are you creating margin that are important in your relationship with God? So instead of wanting more, how about thinking through how we are investing with the time that we have? I'm going to show this video. I think some of you might have seen it before, but it's a powerful illustration of how much time we have left. Now, I was there where you were, those of us who are younger, at one time. And I know for myself that a lot of times when you're in your 20s, you feel like the whole world is ahead of you, that you have a lot of time. But it wasn't until I saw people who were very young who passed away. It wasn't until I started getting older and you blink your eye and you realize you've aged 20 years. You're like, what happened with time? When you finally come to that realization that time is something that goes by so quickly. And so until you are older and you're near death, when you really begin to consider how you spent your time. But I pray that as many of us are young, and some of us are going through midlife, I'm just praying that we will consider how we use our time with the time that we have left. I don't know how long that will be. For some of us, it might be another year. For some of us, it's another 20 years, maybe 60 years. But with the time that we have left, the question is, how are you investing in it? So let's watch this video and we'll come back together. I don't know about you, but that's very sobering and a visual reminder that so much of the time goes into so many things that we have to do every single day. And we don't think about the time that we do have and how we spend that. And a lot of what your life will become really is related to what you do with your time. I know for some of us, time, it's a commodity that we cannot waste. Every single second counts. Every single minute, every single hour counts. Some of us are so busy, we have so many things to do that we just feel overwhelmed and we don't know what to do with the time that we have or the lack of time that we have. So I want you to think about that for a moment. If your life can be described in jelly beans, and you think about where you are right now with the time that you have left, how are you investing your time? How are you using your time? That's why today I want to talk about the importance of creating margins with our time. So here's the one thing for this morning is simply this, that our time in life with all its brevity, because it is short, it must be used for God in humility. So our time in life with this brevity, we must use it for God in humility. I'm going to talk about two things here as we look at these three verses. And I think it really highlights why it's so important to understand the brevity of life. Because the more you understand that life is short, then every single hour, every single minute, every single second that you have, you will use it for the glory of God and with humility, because you don't know when you're going to pass away. That is something that God determines, how long you live. You could be in shape, you can exercise, you can take all the vitamins and eat healthy, but when you pass away, that is not determined by you. That will be something that God has already determined, and with the time that you have, the question is, what are you going to do with it? So I want to talk about two of these specific things that we have to remember. If you don't remember these two things, you're not going to understand about life with all its brevity. With the limited time that we have, we're not going to use it for God in humility. So here's the first thing. The first thing you have to remember is that life is fleeting without perspective. So if you don't have perspective in life, life is going to be so fleeting that it's going to discourage you. I want to talk about this psalm because this psalm was written by David, and some scholars say that it was during the time when his son Absalom was rebelling against him. Other scholars say that this is during a time when ungodly people just continued to live in evil and do evil things. And the thing was that there was no consequences for them. They continued to do evil. And there was a sense of, God, where are you? What's going to happen in the midst of all this unrighteousness? So when you look at this psalm, you realize that is kind of the thrust of what the psalm is all about. But right in the middle, what we notice is David begins to lift up a prayer, and he puts things in perspective when it comes to the issue of time. That's why in verses 1 through 3, we notice that he talks about how he is silent before God. In fact, it says that he doesn't want to sin against God by saying something that he's going to regret. Because when you look around, whenever you see evil, whenever you see things that are unfair or unjust, one of the things is that a lot of times we complain. So here's David in the first three verses of this psalm where he says, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to be in silence before God. Then what we see is that he decides to pray. So in verse 4 and to the rest of this chapter, he begins to lift up a prayer. And that's what we're going to be looking at in verse 4, 5, and verse 6. So when we look at these two verses, the verse 4 and 5, we're going to notice something. So let's read this prayer by David. So this is what it says here. It says, O Lord, make me know my end and what is the measure of my days. Let me know how fleeting I am. Behold, you have made my days a few handbreadths, and my lifetime is as nothing before you. Surely all mankind stand as a mere breath. I want to talk a little bit about this because when we look at these two verses, there's several things that you will notice that I think is very important for you to understand and have perspective when you think about how life is so fleeting. The first thing is this: there's a sense of awareness. Everyone say awareness. This is very important because in verse 4, David prays that, and says, O Lord, make me know my end. The phrase make me know is translated in various different ways. In the NLT, it's translated as remind me. The Message translation says tell me. And the NIV says show me. So David is praying to God that God would bring a greater awareness of how fleeting and how short life is. This is one of the key things I believe that will help us to have some perspective in life. So pause here and think about this for a moment. Oftentimes when you're going through difficult times, when you don't have perspective, you think the whole world is collapsing. That's why when you pull back and gain some perspective, that's when you're going to realize that this is just a small little portion of what you're going through in light of eternity. Those of you who are students and you're studying for your finals, I know you feel like the whole world is crashing before you. I'm going to tell you something that might discourage you. Your finals that you're going through right now, it is nothing compared to what is coming up in your life. Can I get a good amen from the single adults and the older people in this room? See the volume level? That is a volume level of conviction and experience. You are going to go through things, students, that will literally be harder than what you're facing right now with your finals. It's about perspective. And those of us who are busy at work and we're going through a lot of other things, life is going to get harder. Some of us in this room have experienced it. Some of us have not. But some of us, if not all of us, are going to experience the death of a loved one. We're going to see tragedies. Our hearts are going to be broken. There's going to be unfulfilled and unrealized dream in our lives. And all these things, you need perspective to realize that in this life, however long that you have to live, it's nothing compared to eternity. And that's why David prays this prayer to show me, tell me, help remind me, help me to understand the end of my life. Because that is what gives us perspective. When you have a sense of awareness that life is fleeting and life is short, you are more willing to do things because the lack of time, or you just learn to accept it that this is your lot and you're going to trust in God and God alone. So think about that for a moment. When you understand how life is fleeting, you are more willing to have this perspective and either trust God more or to be able to accept it and have peace. This is what a lot of people do when they come towards the end of their lives, when they're in the bed in the hospital. That's why a lot of times they want to not hold that grudge anymore, so they forgive. They reconcile on their deathbeds because they realize that they're going to die soon. It gives us perspective when you know that you're going to die one day. That's why I think it's important to understand that we cannot change without having this sense of awareness. Peter Cesaro, in his book, The Emotionally Healthy Leader, references a Benjamin Bloom, who is this educational psychologist. And he talks about there are different stages to real change. And he mentions specifically that there are 5 stages in which people need to go through if there's going to be real change. And as I thought about this, I realized this is really the process of sanctification. This is really what we've been talking about in our church with the 4 R's. Where there's a sense of realization, and then there will be repentance, and you receive the forgiveness and the love of God, the mercy of God, and then you recommit to the things that you know you ought to. And you can continue to repeat this until those things that you realize are things that are value to you and things that you want to live by. It's kind of interesting here because if you look at the 5 stages, I'm going to show you a diagram in this book. He talks about here that there are 5 stages. There's aware. You got to first be aware. You got to ponder, you got to value and reprioritize and own. So let's look at the picture here. And so if you look at this, it should be the other way, but it's okay. It's kind of going upward. You're going to start realizing that the first part of true change is there has to be an awareness. Without the awareness, you're not going to even change, no matter how much you try. So the first thing is awareness, and then you ponder upon these things. You begin to think through it. This is where you connect the dots. We always talk about that. Connect the dots. You're not going to turn the corner until you begin to connect the dots. This is why I respond this way all the time. This is why I keep on turning to that thing or to that person all the time. Without that pondering, which is the reflection, we're not going to change. And I think this is one of the weaknesses of many of us. Is that you could realize things, be aware of things. People have told you these are the things in your life. But if you don't take the time to ponder and to reflect and to connect the dots, you're not going to take the next step, which is, okay, we switched it, praise God. The next one is value. It begins to internalize within you and you say, this is important. But here's the thing. The action, which is the behavioral gap, that's the gap we have to go past in order to experience change. Then we start reprioritizing our lives and realizing I cannot keep on doing this anymore. I want to change. So you start reprioritizing things according to your values. And then the last one is ownership, where you own it. Now you're living it every single day. This is a value. This is something that you are responsible for. Why am I sharing this? Because when we talk about time and the importance of time and creating margins for time, unless there is awareness in your life, you are not going to change. Some of you get excited for every single new semester because you don't have any homework or any finals to study for in that time. But here we are. Don't raise your hand. How many of us are cramming again? This is what you did last semester. This is what you did the semester before. This is what you did the year before. This is what you did 2 years before. There's no change. You continue to do what you're doing, and you continue to be stressed. You continue to turn to other things. So there's no real change in you. How many of us, once again, when you are working, you continually have to put in overtime. Now, understand, when you're working, there are circumstances outside of your control. It might affect your job. If you say, you know what, at 7 o'clock, I need to leave. I have other responsibilities. I know that could affect your promotion. That could affect other things. And this is not the United States. We're like, no, you need to pay me, but you have to do it. That's part of your job. But once again, we continue to not learn from what happened in the past. So if you are unaware, that means that you have blind spots that you are not understanding in your life. You don't see your weaknesses. You don't see your flaws. So let me kind of put it in this way to help us to understand why awareness is so important. For some of us, we think that all the problems in our lives is because of other people. But we are not aware that we are the cause. I want you to think about that for a moment. I have seen people come to our church, and I find out later they came from another church. And then because I know a lot of these pastors, I found out that you went to another church before you came to that church, before you came to our church. The church is not the problem, it's you. You are the problem. You can have the most perfect church, which there's never a perfect church, but the most perfect as we can get, and you'll still have a problem. It is not the church, it is you. And because you're so unaware of your issues in your life, you continue to perpetuate it when you go to another community. You end up going to another church, and then you go to another church. That's a lack of awareness, and that's why you're constantly uprooting yourself, and you don't have a community where you could really grow together as a church family. Let me give you a couple more. How many times we make judgment on things without realizing that it might have been a misunderstanding or that we don't have all the information. Over the years, I had to learn this the hard way. Because as soon as I see something, as soon as I hear about something, the natural reaction is to jump into conclusions. But then I'm not being aware of my emotions. I'm not being aware of what's happening around me, that maybe possibly that there's something that happened that I don't know about. Maybe there's something that's going on that I don't have all the information. So instead of jumping into that conclusion, I then pause and to realize maybe there's something going on that I need to understand. So awareness helps you then to be gracious. Awareness then helps you to understand better and seeing what's going on. Here's a couple more. We wonder why we're not getting a promotion or why we're not able to do something that we really want to do. And I realize that we just don't have awareness of our weaknesses and some of these things that we need to work on. For some of us, we think that everyone likes us, but I'm going to wake you up here, but in reality, people are just tolerating you. We don't have the awareness. So you're not going to change unless awareness comes. So here's David. When he thinks about his life, everything that's happening, he's praying to God, God, help me to know my end. Because the more he begins to understand his end, that's when he has the perspective in light of what he's going through at this time. I'm wondering, do you have awareness? Do you know how fleeting life is and how our time is limited? Psalm 89, verse 47 says this, and read the yellow section with me. It says this, remember how short my time is. For what vanity you have created all the children of man. Psalm 90, verse 4 in the NIV says this, for 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. You're not going to live forever here on this earth. Time is short. And every single one of us is going to be different. We're going to die at different times. But with the time that we have, what are you doing? So the first thing is awareness. The second thing, as we talk about the importance of understanding life is fleeting so that we can have this perspective, is that there's an assessment. So once there's an awareness, there has to be this assessment about our lives. In verse 5, David uses the illustration of handbreadths. Now, the thing about handbreadths is that in the biblical times, they would use 4 fingers like this to measure. That's why they call it a hand breadth. They would use this to measure things, these 4 fingers. And so what David does is he uses this illustration of a measurement that they are so familiar with, and he says, this is our life right here. Our life is like a handbreadth right here because it is compared to eternity. Now, if all you see in perspective is this is my whole life, it just seems almost overwhelming because you're going through all these things and you're thinking to yourself, how long, oh Lord? But if you look at, let's say this is eternity starting from here and it just keeps on going, you realize that if you're 20-some years old or maybe you're 40-some years old, then your life literally is this much compared to eternity. So as he's praying not only to the end of his life, help me to know the end of my life, he's also assessing his life to say that my life is only this big in light of eternity, which is pretty much, it's small. It's insignificant in light of the bigger things and the bigger picture. And he's trying to understand this and to pray this to God because when he knows that life is short, and it seems as if this little 4 finger that measures my life compared to eternity is not that big, it gives us perspective. I want to ask us this question. How many of you would like to know when you're going to die? Anybody? No, people don't want to raise their hand because he fooled us one time and he yelled at us about this. But let's think about this. Okay, don't raise your hand. Just think about this. How many of you in this room would love to know when you're going to die? I mean, I would like to say that majority of us would like to know. Because then if you know, let's just play it out. If you know you're going to die next week, you're going to go to the Fijis next day. I'm going to go to Finland or somewhere because I want to see the aurora lights. That's one of my bucket lists. I want to do that before I die. If I only have 1 week to live. So when you think about the question, how many of us would like to know when we're going to die? I would say majority of us would like to. Now, my question is, why do you want to know? This is the assessment that we need in our lives. We say, yes, I want to know when I'm going to die, but the question is why? Why do you want to know? And I realized when I thought about that for my own life, the reason why I want to know is because there are a lot of things I want to do. Now, if you knew when you're going to die, I would say there are a couple things you have to remember. First of all, we will not be faithful. Think about this for a moment. If you knew you're going to die at a certain time, you're not going to faithfully do things every single day. You're going to just wait, delay, procrastinate, and then right before you're about to die, then you would do it and say, Lord, I'm faithful. I love you, and take me home. How do I know this? Because once again, look at your finals. You had 3 months to study and prepare. But here we are, cramming, staying up all night. Because there's something called what? A deadline. There's something called finals. So something about knowing when you're going to die or when the deadline is, a lot of times it's not so that we could then faithfully prepare, but we know that it's there, but it's not here, so we continue to procrastinate and we're not going to be faithful to what God has called us to do. Second reason is that we will not trust in God. If you knew when you're going to die, you will not trust in God. And this is the thing. Christian life is about trust. Even the simple things about our daily bread, our food, we have to trust in God. That's why I think when you don't know when you're going to die, every single day, it might be the day that you will die. It helps you to trust in God. The third and last reason I thought of was it will not develop a life of faith. I think for many of us in this room, we love to control. We like to determine our own fate and our own destiny. That's why when we know when we're going to die, then we will then take our own powers and we will start controlling things because we know that on this day, we're going to pass away. The reality is we're not in control. God is. We're not in control of our time to some extent. God is, because he's the one who gives us the time. But with the time that we have, the question is, are you creating margins in your life so that you can obey God? That's why David's assessment of his life in comparison to eternity reveals that not only if life is short, but it's relatively insignificant. It amounts to nothing because it is a dot of a dot of a dot of a little dot in light of eternity. Psalm 103, verse 15 and 16 in the New Living Translation says this: our days on earth are like grass, like wildfire. We what? Come on, say this. Bloom and die. The wind blows and we are gone as though we had never been here. What a thought. That we bloom and then we die. When you see that life is not only fleeting but is short, it helps us to have this kind of perspective. Psalm 90, verse 10, and also in verse 12, it says this: 70 years are given to us. Some even live to 80. But even the best years are filled with pain and trouble. Soon they disappear and we fly away. It says what? Teach us to realize the brevity of life so that we may grow in wisdom. Life is short. That's why when you begin to understand how fleeting it is, it gives us perspective. If you don't have that perspective, you're going to forget how fleeting life is. Let me close out with the second point. Not only is life fleeting without this sense of perspective, but life is futile without purpose. Some of you might know the Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky. To kind of say with the Russian accent, right? He said this, and I thought it was really interesting. Listen to what he says. If you want to totally destroy a prisoner psychologically, just make them dig a hole and fill it again over and over all day long. And in some gulags, they actually tried that out as a form of torture, and he was right. It worked. It proved people completely crazy. So those of you who are not familiar, what they did during World War II, the Nazis did it as well, and the Russians and many of these other people, they would take these prisoners and they would make them dig. So here's a picture. They would just make them dig this hole or this ditch. And after they finished digging that hole, you know what they will tell them? Fill it back up. And they'll do this over and over again, not sometimes in the same place, but sometimes in a different place. Dig a hole and then fill it up again. Dig a hole and then fill it up. They were doing this over and over, and it was proven that psychologically it made these people, these prisoners, go crazy. In fact, some of them were going so crazy they just wanted to die. Now, the reason why this is very significant is that I, as a prisoner, if I'm digging this hole, I must be thinking there must be a purpose behind digging this hole. But then I fill it up again. The very hole that I just dug, I fill it up with the very dirt that I put out, I'm putting back in. Can you imagine doing something that seems as if there's no purpose at all? That is the point. Digging a hole and then filling it back up, there is no purpose to it. The only purpose is to psychologically damage you. And many of these prisoners, they were broken because of this. And many of these prisoners wanted to just die. Now, why is this significant for us as we talk about time? It's because you are creating a sense of meaninglessness in a person's life. And that is what causes a person to die inside, if not physically. When there is no purpose in life, you get up in the morning, you go to work, and then afterwards you come back, and then you watch some social media or you look at some Netflix, and then you go to sleep and you get up again, and then you go to work, and you do this over and over again. When there is no meaning, there is no sense of purpose in your life, it will kill you inside. Same with those of you who are students who are studying. You get up and you study and you do this over and over, and you're like, why am I studying? What is the purpose of life? And as soon as you start feeling the sense of meaninglessness, that is what kills you in your soul. That's why you start getting depressed. It's very hard for you to get up in the morning. That's why you get so distracted by so many other things, entertainment, because you're trying to get your mind away from the fact that you, as you're even right now sitting there, you have no purpose and no sense of meaning in your life. And here's David in his prayer as he talks about that life is fleeting without this perspective. You need perspective because life is short. Now he begins to understand that life is futile. There is no sense of meaning without this purpose. So let's read verse 6. This is what it says in verse 6. It says, surely a man goes about as a shadow. Surely for nothing they are in turmoil. Man heaps up wealth and does not know who will gather. I would say this is a great reminder of when you don't have purpose in your life. The phrase, surely a man goes about as a shadow, is translated as man is an unsubstantial phantom. Like you literally come and you go and no one knows you're there. Once again, this idea that we are just mere shadows appears again in different parts of Scripture. You'll see this more clearly as we talked about not too long ago in James, and it describes how we're like a morning fog that comes and disappears. James chapter 4, verse 14, it says this, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are what? Come on, say this. A mist that appears for a little while of time and then vanishes. You come and then you go. Can you imagine if you understand that life just appears and then it's gone and there is no sense of meaning and purpose? Who would want to live? David helps to describe people who are busy doing things but have no sense of purpose. So here's time that you have, but you're doing things with the time that you have, but you don't have purpose. He says, surely for nothing they are, or as they do, there's in turmoil. So the New Living Translation says this, and all are what? Busy rushing ends in nothing. The NIV says he bustles about and only in vain. The New King James says surely they are what? Busy themselves in vain. Isn't that us? A lot of us? We're so busy, but it's in vain. We're so busy rushing from one thing to another, but it ends in nothing. The phrase of how a person heaps up wealth and does not know who will gather, it is a reference to a person who is amassing riches for himself and forgets that he cannot take it with him. I think that's one of the saddest things. People who spend so much of their time and so much of their energy trying to amass all this wealth, thinking to themselves that they're going to enjoy this at the end of their lives, but you don't even know when you're going to die. And even when you get to the point where you make a lot of money and you're about to die, you're thinking to yourself, who's going to take this money? That's why, as I say it all the time, why do you think there's names on buildings on universities? Now, praise God, there are some people with a very philanthropist heart, but they realize they cannot take this money with them, so they might as well dedicate a building and help build a building with their names engraved on it for eternity. Well, some students decide to burn it down, but it will grave on a building. You cannot be buried in your car, whatever car that may be, because you spent so much time trying to buy that. You cannot get buried in with your apartment. I mean, you could get buried with your deed of the apartment, but think about it. Everything in this world one day will fade away. When you die and get buried or cremated, whatever you're going to do, you cannot take those things with you. So what David is praying as he begins to understand, as not only as he's assessing his life, there's a sense of awareness in his life that life is fleeting. He realized how foolish and how futile it is when you do all these things just to amass all this wealth, and then you cannot enjoy it. You cannot take it with you. In fact, in other portions of Scripture, it says that is a fool. This is exactly what Jesus taught. In Luke chapter 12, verse 16 through 21, listen to what it says. And he told them a parable, saying, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have, come on, say this, ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? I want you to think about that phrase. He says, you fool. The things that you have prepared, the things that you have amassed, the things that you have owned, the things that you have right now, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. So even Jesus was teaching this. That the fool is a person who amasses all this stuff, thinking that it's going to bring them a sense of meaning and purpose, and at the end, they're going to have to die. They cannot take it with them. Then all your hard work now is given to somebody else. Everything is in vain because it's going to amount to nothing. When we forget this, this is when a lot of despair and a sense of purposelessness begins to overtake us. Just think about some of the things you're putting a lot of time and energy in right now. Is it going to last? Is it going to amount to something? Some of us are putting a lot of time and energy into something that I believe that will not bring a sense of purpose and meaning. That's why there's something beautiful about serving, because you're investing your time, creating the margins to serve, but it's not for yourself, but it's for others. And that's why there's a sense of joy and a sense of just excitement and peace in your heart, knowing that you're doing something that's going to impact others around you. Even when you give, you could use it for yourself, but you have so many things. Once again, do not raise your hand, but I'm wondering how many of you guys have those friends or family members, they have everything, and you don't know what to get them for Christmas. You know those people who have everything? What do you get them? And so there are times when you have so much, and you think about your paycheck, you think about your bank account, and you're like, how else can I spend this? Because I have everything right now. And that's where I believe, or some of us, we're going to start feeling this sense of emptiness, even though you have a lot. Some of us who don't, we think to ourselves, if I do have all this, I'm going to try to do this. And I'm telling you, before you even get started, it's going to lead you to emptiness if you don't have a sense of purpose. That's why when you create margins, even with your resources, and now you're able to respond to God, that's when the joy comes, because you realize it's no longer just about yourself, but it's about the things and the purposes of God. This is why I keep on saying, why do you study so hard? For what? Why do you work so hard? For what? If it is not connected to God's purposes, to the greater things, there's going to be a sense of emptiness in your life. That's why the writer of Ecclesiastes reinforces the craziness of working so hard and not being able to enjoy it, and because you have to leave it behind. Listen to what it says in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 18 to 21. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must what? Come on, say this with me. Leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. This is what many conglomerates and wealthy people think about when they think about dying. Who am I going to give it to? Which son, which daughter? Because this one is a fool, this one is a fool. They spend all their money. This is the dilemma. Some of you are like, I wouldn't mind that dilemma. But think about this. Who are you going to leave it to once you die? And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will be master of all, for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to what? Despair over all the toil, my labors under the sun. So he given himself over to despair because he's thinking about all the times he worked hard for all this, and now who is going to give it to? Because sometimes a person who has toiled in wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This too is vanity and great evil. If you don't know your why in life, then everything will be meaningless and in vain. Why do you study? Why do you work? Why do you come to church? Why do you go to life group? Why do you get up in the morning? Why do you get involved with whatever that is? Why are you serving? If you forget your why, it's going to become meaningless, and then it's going to lead to despair. That's why Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 7 and 8 says this, I observed yet another example of something meaningless under the sun. This is a case of man who is all alone, without a child or brother, yet who works hard to gain as much wealth as he can. But then he asks himself, who am I working for? Why am I giving up so much pleasure now? It is all so meaningless and depressing. So can I just pause here and just help us to think through this? Your life and my life, it is very brief. Our time is limited. We have 4,553 jelly beans left. What are you going to do with it? That's why unless there is this perspective that life is short and life is fleeting, we're not going to create the margins with our time to do something significant. If you don't have a sense of purpose, then your life is going to end up in futility and you are going to be discouraged and in despair. That's why life is futile without purpose. And I think this is the greatest example and why the gospel message is so important as it speaks to any of you who are in this room who are feeling this. Because the gospel simply says that you were created with a purpose, for a purpose. And the more you understand that in the midst of your own sinfulness and my sinfulness, that we were separated from God, but God in his tremendous love for us, he sent his one and only son to die on the cross for your sins and my sins. That should have been us hanging on that cross because that would be just because of the sins that we have committed against a holy God. But Jesus took our place. And there was this great exchange that happened. Our sins for his holiness and his life so that we can have life. And the more you understand this gospel message, the more you realize with the time that I have left, even though I don't know how long it's going to be, but with the time that I have left, every single morning that I get up, I want to live with a sense of gratitude and purpose that Jesus Christ died on the cross for my sins. You could redeem the time. All the time that some of you have wasted, all the time that some of us have just kind of squandered away, you could redeem it when you have this sense of purpose and when you have this sense of perspective. When you realize life is fleeting, it's short, it's just a handbreadth right here. This is your life in light of eternity. That every single day you want to use it for a greater purpose, which is to glorify God. Your life will never be the same. That's why the one thing, once again, is that our time in life with all its brevity must be used for God in humility. I want to give us the next steps for us to think about and also take action. So I'm going to help us to remember these 4 things by using the acronym TIME. Everyone say TIME. And if you apply some of these practical things, and once again, it could just be a whole sermon on each one of them because there's things that you have to understand biblically as well as practically. But I'm going to try to give it to you quickly here. And this will be great to really ponder, to think about how am I going to bring change? Find those people that love you, care for you, who can help you in this process. The first thing, the T, is track how you spend your time. It is amazing how many of us don't know how much time that we spend on things. How many of you guys use like that tracker, how much time you spent on social media? You know? And at the end of the day or the end of the week or however long it is, you look at it like, wow, I can't believe I spent that much time. You guys know what I'm talking about. Whoa. We are in heaven now. Think about it. Think about all the times that you just kind of spend on social media, and once you realize, you're like, that's a lot of time. I wasted. I could have done X or Y or Z or whatever it is. So one of the best ways to track your time is to just look at your schedule. I mean, there are things that you have to do. You have to go to work. You have to go to your classes. Then you put in life group and maybe church and LCG, your life change group there that you're like, these are things that are fixed. These are things that I'm going to do. And then the rest, within that 24 hours, you take away sleep and maybe you're going to have lunch with somebody. You begin to see. Now, the sad part, there's some of us in this room that don't even keep a calendar. We just live day by day. And all I can say to you is, I think it's helpful to plan out your week, to think about what's coming up with the time that God has given you. How are you creating margins in your life? And you realize, I'm spending so much time at work. I'm spending so much time doing X or Y, and this is not going to help me. So track how you spend your time. The I is invest your time aligned with your values. One of the best ways to create the margins for time and to use it wisely is to think about what you value. If you value relationships, if you value improvement, if you value other people in terms of loving them, if you value evangelism, you say, I'm going to share my faith on a regular basis. Some of you value having compassion and reaching out to people who are less fortunate than you. Like, what you value is how you're going to act. And so when you begin to invest your time that you have on things that you value, that's where the meaning and purpose comes. Some of you invest your time in things that I personally believe that does not have much value. So you got to think about, what do I value? What is important to me? And make sure that you allot the time to do that. So the T is what? Say it with me. What is it? Track how you spend your time. The I is invest time, align with your values. The M is this: manage your schedule well. Manage your schedule well. Like, please don't go to the other extreme. Here you are talking with somebody in a cafe and they're crying. You're like, oh, sorry, I got to go to my next meeting. I'll see you later. So we get that. You know, sometimes we plan out different things. I remember when I was in Jakarta, our family, we were there for 1 year, started our first international church in Jakarta. A lot of the local Indonesians said to me, Pastor, you might want to keep in mind that you don't want to have back-to-back meetings. Because you just never know. I go, why? It's like traffic. And I realized traffic was the magic word in Indonesia. They're late. Oh, traffic. Oh, okay. They don't do the quiet time. Oh, traffic. Huh? Oh, okay. You know, traffic. Blame everything on traffic. And so I'm like, traffic? No, man. I'm going to schedule this and this and this. And I just remember the first time after my meeting, we're in our car going and traffic. And the realization that I'm not going to get there on time for my second meeting, started overwhelming me. I'm like, oh no, I'm not true to my word. What's going to happen? So I'm calling this, I'm so sorry, traffic, you know. And I'm thinking, I'm becoming an Indonesian, you know, sorry, traffic. So I learned really quickly that don't plan back-to-back meetings. I've also learned here as well that it's better to just sit in one place and let people come to you. Because I realized that sometimes meeting them at different places, the time that it takes to go from A to B to B to C, it takes a lot of time. And if your time is tight, I realized just sitting there and then meeting them every hour, people come. It's the best. But in America, it was easy because as soon as the next appointment comes, they will come up to me and they're like, hey, that's Seth. And I'm like, okay, I got you. You know, I'm going to pray right now. But here in Asia, everyone's so they don't want to disrupt. So here I am talking to this person. I go, I don't know where my next appointment is. I'm supposed to meet with this person next. Anyway, they're not here, so let's talk. So we're talking longer, and all of a sudden, from the corner of my eye, I see him sitting there. And I'm like, oh, I think they're here after 2 hours, right? They go, I thought we were going to meet at this time. I was like, yeah, I saw you really talking with this person. I'm like, you got to get my attention, bro. But make sure that you manage your schedule well. I share these things because I think it's so important to, once you understand what you invest in, the things that you value, manage it well. Sometimes put some buffer space. Sometimes for me, I cannot meet people back to back. Sometimes I need to for that day because sometimes I need a little break because I get drained. And so I need about an hour. I need about an hour and a half just to kind of clear my mind. And sometimes I just need to be in his presence. So make sure you manage your time well. That's why there are a couple days where I just meet with people. That's all I do. There are other days I don't meet with anybody because I need to prepare the sermon and focus on different things. I've even scheduled my schedule where on certain days I focus on different responsibilities that I have. Some of them are global movements. Some of the things are locally here in our church. So each day I assign different things. So when you're able to manage your schedule well, then I believe that you create these margins so that you could use it for the glory of God. And the last thing is this: evaluate your schedule often. You know, a lot of times we forget to evaluate and see, you know what? I've been using a lot of the time for myself. I need to start using some of this for other people. You know, I've been so busy hanging out with people that I haven't had time to spend time with God. So tomorrow, I'm not going to meet with people. I'm just going to focus on my time with God. So when you begin to evaluate your schedule, you realize that's when you know where it's lopsided and you try to bring it back into balance. Can I just make one more comment and then we'll close out here? I think when it comes to time, everyone likes to think of this balance, like, 25% here, 25% here, 25% here, 25%. It's 100%. Life doesn't work that way. What I tell people, it is kind of like a wheel where there's a hub. Christ is in the center, and all these spokes are different responsibilities and different things that you do. And that wheel starts turning. So there are certain moments when, even though they're all important, that this might become the most important thing at that moment. And so you're going to have to adjust. And I think that's such a very important mindset to have, because a lot of times we like to say, put God here and then family and do all this stuff, which I think is important. But life sometimes doesn't work that way. As long as you put Christ in the center, the wheel will constantly be changing and turning. And there will be times when family has to be the number one thing at that moment. Other times there might be other things that you have to do. Right now, you're not even responding to any WhatsApp because you have to study for your finals, right? When you used to be so busy responding and texting all the time, right? The wheel is turning. And now this is a busy time for some of us. And other times, you could do other things. So just keep that in mind. But at the end of the day, what I want to say to you is simply this. You and I are limited with time. And life is short. And it's going to be fleeting. With the time that you have, use it maximally for the glory of God. Create the margins throughout the day and throughout the week where you're creating time for God, creating time for yourself along with time for others. Make the investment that's aligned with your purpose and your values. Evaluate and begin to see, this week, how has it been? Maybe for next week, I got to adjust. And the thing is that have people speaking to your life that can help you so that when you think about life, you realize I'm doing the very thing that God has called me to do in my purpose. I pray that that will be your heart.
Thank you for listening to the Harvest Mission Community Church podcast. For more information, visit our website at hongkong.hmcc.net.